WJR.
So you do have to pare down and get back to the basics of what your company is. And that's part of the key element of a successful organizational transformation. And I'm sure, Joe, you have some things that you'd add to what Chuck just said.
Yeah, exactly as Chuck said, cash is king, and we need to understand where it is. But what I try to get companies to understand is, and believe it or not, Paul W., they are sitting out there waiting for a price increase, or they're waiting for a reduction in supplier costs, or they're waiting for, GM to give them the next new volume. And it's just amazing that people are sitting there waiting for someone to do something.
Oh boy.
If you remember Lee Iacocca's famous quote, there's people that make dust and there's people that eat dust. And in this environment, no one's going to make dust for you. You're either going to eat it or you got to do something. So besides the cash piece, we try to get people to focus on 2 or 3 things that you can improve inside your 4 walls. You are not going to change the environment of Detroit. You are not going to change the environment in the U.S. economy. What can you do? And it does start with cash. I'll go into companies and they're crying about every issue in the world and they have 60, 70 days of inventory. Well, that's cash. Let's get inventory down. What's driving that inventory? They're running overtime, weekends, whatever. Why are we doing it? Well, we try to make 10, we only end up getting 7 good ones. That's why you're running overtime. Let's figure out how to make 8 good ones, maybe not 10 tomorrow. And back to my earlier statement, daily metrics. How do I know I'm doing better? If I have 60 days of inventory and I want to reduce it 1 day every month, every week, then let's put some metrics in place. Let's put David in charge of that. And let's hold David accountable for reducing that inventory level. Those are the pieces. It's not the thought, it's the execution. The execution is terrible.
Well, then for either one of you, and maybe each one of you have a input on this, when do you know you need that outside help? What's the trigger point that says, I better call CM&D, I better call Whitehall Group, or the bank, call my bank and talk to the folks at National City Bank because I need their help, their expertise. When do you know?
Well, I'll start off, Paul W. Unfortunately, what we see too often is exactly what Joe just referred to, which is tomorrow is going to be a sunnier day, and companies don't look at reality. Probably the most important thing that companies should be focused in on right now is developing realistic projections, taking into account and even developing significant downside scenarios. And if they believe that they are not going to be able to make it through from point A to point B, that's really where they have to be getting their lender as well as other potential outside support involved. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often, and we are often referred in by constituents that feel that the company needs help, but yet the company may not agree with that. So we are engaged by the company, and we work directly with the company to make sure that it's not only putting together realistic plans, but also that its plans are being communicated very, very effectively with the various constituents that are key to making sure that it gets carried through.
Good point, Chuck.
And Paul W., I'd like to maybe add from a different perspective the same answer.
Sure, Joe.
You had asked earlier, what does a good company do? Good company analyzes that every single day. They know as soon as there's a hiccup, and they're on it in that war room environment with those daily metrics, they're getting the indicators. The clients that we're talking about, unfortunately, they need someone to tell them, either their bank or a constituent. And that's the sad part. That's the frustrating part from, I think, all of our industry expertise, is that the good companies do it every single day.
Well,
why does it take you to get in trouble before you get the program?
Well, David, you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong. Part of it is, when you're a major publicly traded company, you're told by Wall Street, and then there's a lot of pressure. If you're Mr. Entrepreneur, frankly, Joe, if you hadn't been successful starting a Whitehall Group, or people who are out there who are in a family business that's they're the 2nd or 3rd generation, it's difficult to come in and say, your dad did a great job, or your grandfather did a great job, but the system that he set up and the way he set it up isn't working today, and we need to help you change that. That's a difficult thing. You're not talking just about a company and numbers. You're talking about a family and a history.
There is a lot of pride in privately owned companies, and particularly
those that are run by the owners. And oftentimes, change comes upon them faster than they can
I would think they'd be
accept
the
that.
hardest, oftentimes the hardest people to make understand. That,
Oh, they are.
They are.
They're the hardest working people. I mean, they work hard.
and it
but
always
they work
worked
hard at the
before,
wrong thing.
and it helped me make what I have today.
Right.
And who are you guys, you young college kids coming in here telling me that what I'm doing is wrong?
And oftentimes it's the bank that sees the quarterly or monthly financial statements, and over a period of a couple months or a couple quarters, the declining performance. We have certain covenants in our loans that if you fall below certain performance, we can call the loan, and then the bank comes in, and the bank's the bad guy because the bank's calling the loan. And
But even at that point, excuse me, those are after the fact. And
Right.
again, what we struggle with is trying to get companies, like again, the good companies, that manage every day. You know, it's kind of that scenario, if you just keep writing checks out of your checkbook, you know there's money out there. Well, that's not a real good program. The person that balances it every day knows exactly. It's a little more extra work, sure. It's not rocket scientry, but when you know where you're at every day, you can make course corrections, you can make adjustments, you can notify a bank, you can get outside help. But when the answer is, I'll tell you what the numbers say 30 days after the close of the month when I get the financials from the accounting firm, you're in trouble.
Yeah. It's kind of like, was it Merck in Ann Arbor that pulled up stakes? And the governor got very upset because he said, well, look at how well they did. Look at how, and I said, but that's what a successful company does. They're looking down the road. 5 years from now, they lose their patent on this, or this runs out. They're looking down the road and doing things they feel they need to do before it gets bad. Whereas, as we know, in our biggest industry, we'd watch it get bad, watch it get bad, watch it get worse, watch it get worse, then start to slowly make changes. That's not the way to do it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chuck.
Not a problem, Paul W. I was actually going to give an example of, because I agree with you entirely, it is extremely difficult working with privately owned companies because so often it's really a management issue that has to be addressed. We had an example where it was a fourth generation that was leading the company, one of our clients. The company had a very strong balance sheet. And unfortunately, what that did is it did not create the sense of urgency as they began losing money. And so we were brought in. It was one of those instances where the company actually sought us out prior to its lender or anyone else referring us in. And we put in place some immediate cost reductions, but the most important element of the turnaround, which was very successful, was convincing the ownership, again, fourth generation, that they needed to step aside and bring in professional management. They finally did do that, and the company is performing phenomenally now, and they all are sitting back reaping the rewards.
Sure.
And they're not even having to work to get it.
It might have a little ego bruising, but nothing soothes a bruised ego as well as a much more successful company that becomes much more lucrative to you and the family.
That's right.
And everybody.
You know, the banks really appreciate customers who, you know, are proactive and recognize that when they have a challenge, they communicate with their financial institution. And for your listeners, regardless of where they bank, early notification to a bank and getting the bank engaged and involved, the businesses and the ownership is far more likely to be able to come out of this without having to change banks, without having to incur all the costs and penalties associated with covenant compliance problems and so forth. If they just get the bank engaged as early as they can, start working with folks like Chuck and Joe and others, and go and attack the problem proactively.
Paul W., we believe our industry is much like the medical industry. There are general practitioners and there are emergency room specialists. We tend to be more of emergency room specialists, but if you take that analysis and go back to real life, you know, preventive medicine gets you out of the emergency room many times, and that's really the key. And it's such a hard sell. It's a hard sell in medicine, and it's a hard sell in industry.